Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership. And I'm very lucky to have a guest from Singapore at the moment. There's a lovely connection with Dartmouth, the Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, and his service in the Singapore Navy. Also running the leadership for the whole of the Singapore Navy, which was very interesting. A variety of different jobs he's done, and he's now a great consultant and coach in Singapore, helping loads of people. Without further ado, I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for having me on this show. And I'm so looking forward to sharing some thoughts and, of course, learning from this whole conversation as we always do. By introduction, my name is Karuna Ramanathan. I live in Singapore. I've lived in Singapore all my life. And my first connection to leadership, as you mentioned, actually began quite accidentally at the age of 19 when I got picked. And I'm just still till today, I'm just wondering how that happened. I got picked to attend the 1-year midshipman program in the Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. And that was just such a big eye-opener because, you're 19 years old, you think that you know quite a bit, you've done some sports in school, and you're out there thinking that you're on a scholarship and you're actually quite a great guy because you got picked, two people got picked. And the day I landed there, and from the day I landed to the day I left, it was just mind-boggling. I mean, there's so much to discover about yourself, and there's so much of the limits that you never knew existed. So a lot of it was physical, but I think a lot of it was also mental and resilient. So it's 1 year and hardly any studying, but a lot of self-discovery. And that really reformatted me. I mean, I think that was the major transition from school to work. And when I came back, I did the university thing for 4 years in Singapore and then went into the fleet. And that's really where I started working in what we call now crews, team crews, ship crews. Ship crews are actually teams that are formatted around specific roles. And you guys know that already. But so I started discovering the way I work with people and the impact I started having on people. And out at sea, it's actually quite tense in terms of the environment. It can get quite jumpy because the sea has no respect for anyone except itself. And I've said that in something that I wrote up quite recently. And then the discovery continued. And I've just had the privilege of working with some amazing men and women in those formative years until to the point where I got selected again to get into the minehunter project. And in the minehunter project, I actually worked with crews in Sweden and in Australia. And I spent 2 years in Sydney on exchange service and learned a lot more. So here's the young me, ambitious, being tapered down and slowly discovering that I am not, and we are not as great as we sometimes make ourselves to be. And we need to come to terms with the real us. And it's an uncomfortable discovery for most of us. It was for me to start realizing that actually I wish everyone liked me and they didn't. I mean, basically, that's how it happened. And when I came back because of the experience and the expertise in terms of professional areas, I took command of a minehunter in Singapore at the age of 33. And it was an amazing 2 years experience because that actually panned out quite interestingly. 38 sailors on a 45-meter long ship, closely and tightly bonded, basically enjoying every day and kind of becoming a really expanded team. And I thought I was doing really well. The ship got the best ship in the Navy. And then I went to staff course and basically did well there. And then I asked for the biggest ship in the Navy. And that's where it all went the other way. Now you have from 40 meters, you have 140 meters. You got 8 decks on 8 levels on the ship, 2 helicopters and a crew of 120, 130 men and women. And that same style of leadership that actually worked so well before actually did not cut this time, because I then found myself in a state where I relate to some people, and most people probably found it very difficult to get along with me. And then, I mean, that's something that actually needs a little bit more thought. So I kind of like, the style is largely understated. It's actually very important to adapt, to be situationally aware of what's going on. And most of us struggle with that, Jonathan. I mean, like from my experience, we actually struggle with it because you don't really have a sense of this until you get into some retrospection. And so the moment passes and we have already made an impact, all a bit negative. Now we're getting on then. I actually came out of the Navy because my kids were young, and time separation and all that. That was a tough choice to make, stepping off the ship. But I then had another quite accidental opportunity, and it was a real privilege to be invited to join the Leadership Center, which was just being set up. This was back in 2002, so it was 20 over years ago. And I kind of stayed there for 10 years, worked in some amazing projects, because we were really trying to shift the culture of the military from the traditional command and control and tell and yell to a learning orientation. Hence, leadership work became really important. Did quite a bit there, started up the PhD and studied it a little, and then got graduated out of it. And when I retired from the Navy in 2014, I actually stumbled on yet another opportunity. So it's been quite an accidental life. It's just amazing, right? When I look back. And I got to government for 3 years, and I was government's most senior, Singapore government's most the senior principal organizational development consultant. I was just an internal consultant holding conversations with senior leaders and helping them come to converge on common areas around transformation. In 2017, I stepped out to do this on my own, out of structure, and the last 6 years has been an amazing journey of self-discovery, and I hope value to my clients, some of whom have actually stayed with me for a couple of years. So that's in just all 39 years of major mistakes forgiven by many.
Well, what an amazing story. I'm exhausted by actually following it, and you were living it. So a couple of things come up for me from that. Firstly, I really resonated with when you went from having the best ship with your 38 sailors on a 45-meter ship to then doing well at Staff College, which I did, and then getting the biggest ship. Beware what you wish for, as the old Chinese saying goes. You had a moment, which I had when I went to be an instructor at Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, thinking I was God's gift, and I'd, like you, had outstanding reports. And then I sort of crashed and burned a bit, because I wasn't outstanding. I was just average. And there were peers of mine who were far better, who've now gone on to be generals and do very well. Not that I haven't had a great life too, but it was this lack of humility, this hubris, this overweening self-pride, where I came unstuck, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And I was up against people who really did know what they were doing, and I was just average. And that's when I reached out to find out people who knew about my father. And you can see his, those who are watching can see his cap on the back wall, his Navy cap, which you would have seen in your days at Dartmouth, and his Navy sword. And I learned a lot from that. And they said, you have a choice. You can be a victim. Your father was killed when you were 2.5, or you can be an inspiring leader, learn from him and your mother, who was a philanthropist. And you can go out and find inspiring leaders like you, Kuruna, and others, and get them to tell their stories, share their experience, so you can pay it forward and develop other inspiring leaders. So it's this give and get system that I find. People get a lot from the work I do, but they also give as well. It's this give and get. I like that very much.
Totally.
And your experience is great. That mixture of the Navy, the leadership, the government, your PhD, and then the last 6 years, doing coaching and consulting. It's really good. And you and I were talking before we went on air about inspiring leadership. And would you mentioned a couple of people that you have found inspiring that we may have as guests. We'll see what happens, but they could potentially be guests. But what were the qualities about them that made them inspiring? Do you want to just very briefly take a couple of minutes to mention the both of them?
Most of us fall into the trap of thinking that if we are well liked, we are relational, people relate well to us, we get work done. That's like being in a tight team, and most of us have those experiences. And then we get into a place where we might be managers, and we think that if we can care enough about people, we're also good leaders. But the few leaders that I've seriously taken to admiring are people who can blend this into that additional quality of being strategic, being big picture, being sufficiently aware of the horizons and the ecosystem, at the same time kind of in a duality sense, kind of bringing that down into bite sizes to people to inspire them. So the word I will use is leaders influence, great leaders inspire. And the call to action is very evident in that jump. So I've been privileged to see that more than once.
Yeah, no, that's really great. So you've had some great people to work with. You've also, I'm sure, like me, had some atrocious people that you've worked with, and actually you learn more from the Boris Johnsons and the Trumps and the Liz Trusses than you do from the inspiring leaders, because they are so appalling that you go, I'm really not going to do that. But let's look back at your happiest, proudest moments and darkest moments in your life and your career. What would be a happiest moment, and what did you learn from that? And what was a darkest moment in your personal life or in your work, and what did you learn from that, Karuna?
Yeah, it comes at a very personal level, this question, because one of the happiest moments, and it remains luckily for me the way it is when I met my wife. And that journey, when I look back, I mean, we've been married for 33 years. And she made that, if it was difficult for me, recall I said stepping off the ships after 19 years, like 11 years at sea, it must have been really difficult for her to stop her career. And that choice must have been taken in the interest of the young, we have 2 kids, we're just blessed. Those choices are really difficult to make, especially without any kind of overt or clear reasoning. It's okay, I'll say. So one of the best, happiest moments in my life was actually meeting her. I cannot imagine how I would have been messed up and turned out if I'd not had her by my side. But that's one. The saddest moment in my life is also because of leadership, or the lost leadership opportunity. I thought I could have gotten to know my mother a lot better, and we just didn't have that chance. And all that sacrifice, and you look at servant leadership and you look at concepts like that, it's becoming quite clear to me that she was simply, as most mothers are and were, that she was the silent contributor to my happiness and success, simply by sacrificing so much of herself. And in the later years, I felt that, yeah, I became quite unhappy, thinking that I was just not doing enough. So I don't normally say this, but I think the question is a very apt one, that you don't just look for textbook leaders. These are people in your life who have made a major difference to the way things have happened for me. I mean, for me, and I'm sure for every one of those listeners, you, in some level of retrospection or some self-examination, would be able to pick some of those highs and lows. So thank you. It's a great question. I don't normally get this, but thank you, Jonathan.
Well, it is interesting, and you're like me. You're a babbler. You're full of so much you want to share. You're passionate about it. But it is interesting how your mother was quiet and reflective. So was mine, actually. And it was through that sacrifice. In her case, my mother brought up 3 boys on her own without the naval father. He was killed in the air accident, saving the lives of 2 others. And so she hacked on her own, but she was quiet. But she set me up for success. And it sounds like your mother did the same for you. Am I right?
Quietly in the background, doing everything she thought she could do and enough of, and sacrificing a lot in terms of the usual staples and all that. And it gets to a point where, I mean, we were never middle class, until we were not. It was simple as that. So there was a lot that went on in the later years. I mean, she's passed on for the last 12 years, but I do regularly think of it, and there are flashbacks as to what it might have taken as a parent myself for her to have given up on some of those things. And those things are choices that are quite difficult at times. So yes, I remain deeply grateful to 2 leaders, and they both had amazing effects and have had. And I mean, Jenny, my wife, is actually still doing that for me every day. I find her, I just don't have to pay for that coaching. You know what I mean?
I get great unpaid for coaching from my wife, Lee. and I think anybody who's wise enough to listen to their partner, it's often the case that there's been a few occasions where I've gone, darling, I've got this great idea. I'm going to do this. And she goes, oh, yeah. Do you remember I talked to you about that 3 years ago? And I went, oh, yeah. But there's just this coach told me, or this other person told me. And she went, yeah, okay, good. That's all right. Well done. Good. I'm glad you got there at the end. She's more modest than that. Looking back on advice, if Kuruna, now age 59, had gone back and met Karuna, aged 19, 40 years ago. What bit of advice would you now give the younger Kuruna as he was there at Dartmouth doing his 1-year course as a midshipman? What would you say? This matters. Work on that. Don't worry about that. What advice would you give to a young person today that was advice you would have given to yourself then?
Wow. I would say wake up. And wake up simply means wake yourself up. It's this time is not going to come back. It goes away way too fast, and you don't want to be speaking about this or talking or reflecting about this in this way 30 years from now. Get in and get into it. I mean, wake up. I would just say wake up. And I still say that to a lot of people I'm privileged enough to meet and coach. I say you need to ask yourself whether you're going to awaken that person in you. And you might not like what you see, but you're going to have to deal with you. So it was in a workshop 2 days ago that this came out quite nicely. I said, the existential question for most people is, who am I? But I would like to take it a little, I would like to lower the bar. Whom do I choose to be? And that opens up a whole range of possibilities with choices, commitments, the risk, the effort, the pathways we want to take, the reflections we need to have, the help we need to seek, the mentors we need to grow. That's it.
Yeah, lovely rephrasing. Not who am I, but who do I want? Who do I choose to be? Choice. And we're always at choice. We're always at choice. And I think, looking back on my time in the military and my ability to cope in boarding school when I was away from my mother and my brothers, they were in the boarding school too, but they were in different years and in different classes. That you put on masks, and certainly as a young Singaporean midshipman in the British Naval College, Britannia Naval College at Dartmouth, you'd be putting on a mask of how you think you should behave, looking at the role models of this is the way to be around here. You'd aim to copy them. I mean, we need to look at our children. My 2 daughters, who are now about to be 30 and 29. You know, the younger one was just 14 months behind her biggest, but always sort of following on and trying to do the same thing. Indeed, they're both getting married within 2 months of each other. You know, one
congrats.
Which is very exciting. But I was watching our 2 dogs, who are luckily at the moment sleeping on. they're working Cocker Spaniels, and they're so energetic. But there's a 2.5-year-old and a 7-month-old. Now, the 7-month-old on her own now is running around the garden in a certain pattern that the older dog does when he's going through a sort of nutty phase, yap, 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 running around in a certain circuit. And she's copied it, and she's doing the same. Yeah. And I think we do put these masks on because we think that's the way to be around here. That's how to succeed. That's who I choose to be. But it's very hard to know when you take all the masks off that you put on, what's underneath it? Who are you? I don't know what your thought is on that particular existential question, which at times when people retire or they finish in a job, they go, well, I was that mask, but who am I now? Because I've left the Navy and I'm now in government. I've left government. I'm now on my own. Who am I?
That data set is not easy to process for most people. I mean, at least from my experience, and I'm just like you. I have had the privilege of working for 4 decades, you know, and working in various roles and jobs, and it kind of it becomes coherent retrospectively. So the function of it is age. And the choice and the sum of the lived experiences, provided we actually find mind space or head space to kind of reflect on it. And we do that, right? We do that in the shower, we do that on vacation, we do that on a plane. It starts flashing back. I do that on runs, you know. So, but you try telling that to a 25-year-old or 30-year-old, and who am I becomes a little bit difficult to embrace, because, all right, what are you saying? Because in my work, Jonathan, it looks like there is a phase we go through and we are actually programmed for success. So at 19, I thought I was successful simply by going to Dartmouth. I was not. I thought I went to the university ahead of my classmates and I thought I was successful. I was not. I thought I was good at the small ships, and I was not. It was just not. I thought I was. So success seems to be the dominant. Some research on this as well. Success is kind of happiness at that stage of life. But as you kind of go a little further and you head into your mid-40s and you get all the responsibilities with perhaps caregiving, bringing up children, paying the bills, going to work in the morning, even though you might not like the thought of it, you start figuring out what happiness might actually mean to you. So, and then in the workshops that I have run for a couple of months, the question becomes not success or happiness, but what is the possible balance between these two. And if you look at it as a seesaw, then the fulcrum must surely be our identity. So this then segues into what you just said. So who am I? What are my choices? Who can I choose to be? Who am I at work and who am I at home? Am I the same person? Am I going to adjust some of these trade-offs?
That is so interesting. And that's where in our own leadership work, creating the Inspiring Leadership Compass, of all the 8 components, and there's so many leadership models, but we find these 8 components are very interesting, and that to have them all is very helpful, because then you have an integrated inspiring leader in their work, in their life. They are the same. The most dysfunctional people that I've found over the years, and they disintegrate, is when they have elements of their inspiring leadership identity which they haven't covered. They haven't looked after their health because they've been so resilient, or they haven't got their integrity is a big problem. Time and again, people do things to make a lot of money, but they realize that they're ripping off a load of people who are very poor, selling them stuff they can never afford to pay for, but they're making themselves into millionaires in the process. And then they occasionally have a pang of conscience, and they look back and they go, actually, that was pretty awful. So the integrated inspiring leader got it all together, work and home, they're the same person. If I meet you, Karuna, at home, and I meet you in the consulting and the facilitation you're doing, I would hope you're the same. But it's when I meet the people who go, oh no, at work I'm one persona and at home I'm completely different. The Importance of Being Earnest was a play in Victorian England, and he was one person in the country and he was another person in town. He was Ernst in one, and he was, I don't know, another name, I've forgotten the other name, in the country. And this is where it goes wrong, when you think you have to be these multiple personalities. And if you looked back over your life, and if there was one thing you could change, what would you change? Or what has been a crucible moment that's really influenced your life? What would you share?
I think it was extremely humbling to have been trusted to command a warship. It seemed like it was quite okay at that point in time, but when I look back at what could have gone awfully wrong with 120 people on board a ship in the middle of the ocean in a storm, I can't deal with that sometimes. It's very humbling. The 120 people would have trusted the captain with their lives. And so it's really it's one of those crucible moments. It's like, do not play down the trust that people have in leaders. You actually have to live up to it. If not, you'll be an imposter. So I get into imposter syndrome. In our organizations, we're quite familiar with imposter syndrome. Basically, you have this fear of being found out, and it kind of affects the way you work. But I'm more worried about the imposter. Our organizations have a kind of a regular pattern of some people who are actually not supposed to be where they are because they're not quite ready for it. And they got there and they're just not going to accept the fact that they're not good enough for it. And that really goes all the way south when people start to find that the trust they have in the leaders is not kind of panning out. So this goes back to what you just said, the ethical boundaries, the moral ethical dilemmas that people find themselves in, the microaggressions, a whole lot of stuff going on in organizations. The question then becomes, are you the same at home, or are you inflated in this role? I mean, if you are the same at home, then why are you a leader? But if you're actually role-playing this for your success, to get to that million, to be self-serving, then I think it throws the questions completely off in terms of what gives you the right to be in this position where you're going to actually affect people's lives. And I take that quite seriously.
Yeah, so astute of you to say that. And I think that brings us nicely onto the first of the 8 components of what makes an inspiring leader, which is moral quotient, MQ, as we talk about it, this idea of true north, and having your values, your principles, your integrity, living with a sense of integrity. You're integrated, it's all together. But there have been times in my own career where I've lost my true north. I've gone off, or it's been very gradual. That magnetic north, as you know from your Navy days, is so different from true north that it changes by 7 mils out of 6,000 mils, and it moves a little bit in the UK. Moves a little bit because of where the magnetic core within the Earth moves, and it can just those little changes year after year. You don't kind of notice that in my particular case, with that ambition to get on and succeed and be the best and come out in the top 10% of staff college, that you might cut certain corners just to get there and beat the others and be very competitive and compare yourself all the time. But actually, I find now I have this virtual group of supporters. Nelson Mandela, my father, my mother, who are both dead now, my brother Graham, who is alive, is a retired surgeon. And I imagine, and my wife Lee, I imagine them all with me when I'm on my own with a dilemma, and I go, well, what would my support team say? Would they be proud of what I'm doing now? And the thoughts, they can read my thoughts. Would they be happy with the thinking I'm having? Or would they be appalled? Would I be embarrassed? And so many people do things and think no one will know. But you know, can you look yourself in the mirror? And I think that it's such a key thing. But if you were to talk about a moment when you let your values, your integrity slip a bit, what did you do to bring them back on? And what did you learn from letting it slip? Because everybody can say, oh, I've got very high integrity, I'm perfect in every sense. But in that moment when you were running that battleship, or you doing something to get on in your career, did you let it slip and you brought it back on? And how did you do it?
There were some terrifying moments at sea. I mean, obviously, right? I mean, I spent 5.5 years in command of 2 warships, and I spent 11 years at sea. Take the concept of, and for me, it's been near misses. Near misses is, I mean, the Navy, the Air Force, they know this quite well enough that you actually come close to collision, and then you begin to evaluate what went wrong. And you, more often than not, Jonathan, it probably had to do with something that didn't go right in the first place, and that might have been because of a poor judgment call, or it would have been some carelessness, or. And then so this goes to your question: do you report it because you should? Or do you choose not to because it could be career damaging? So the idea behind near misses is you should report it, but the problem with it is it comes at what is perceived to be a cost to the individual. And for me, I've had those moments. I've actually, and I'll say that on air, I've actually had some near misses, and it was very, very tough for me to deal with myself to actually report it. And I'm sure in the context of organizations, many of us are looking the other way. Microaggressions are another big thing. If you see someone being very subtly verbally assaulted, do you say, hey, I think we need to stop this and we need to pause now because I'm sure that wasn't your intent? Or do we say, well, it's not me, so we just let someone else get it, because I might end up being better. So there are all these daily occurrences, and they all test at our moral and ethical standards. It goes back to that fulcrum, the identity. Who do we choose to be?
Really good. And some articles been coming up about a man called Dominic Raab, who was in the British government, and he's just been removed from his post because he was doing lots of microaggressions. And although he didn't physically hit anybody, he created such a psychologically unsafe environment. And in the middle of the Afghanistan evacuation, he was correcting people's alignment of their documents and not making decisions on getting people out in time. So he was that exact example of someone who was out of their zone and focused more on the criticism and the damaging and the microaggressions. And he was luckily found out. But so many get away with it, and particularly in the forces. It was seen as being a strong leader and the big iconic leader. Well, actually, everybody goes on about Thomas Edison. I was listening to something this morning about Thomas Edison, and Jay Shetty does a very interesting little morning ritual that I listen to on the Daily Calm when I'm doing my mindfulness in the hot tub before I climb into the cold plunge for 2 minutes to really freeze my nuts off. And he was talking about Thomas Edison. And everybody goes, Edison went, oh, well, you've had 99 failures in making the light bulb. What's your learning? Oh, well, I'm that much closer to discovering how to make it work. And everybody sees him as the great man, that he invented all these amazing different things. No, he personally didn't. He led a team of inventors. He had whole factories of people working on certain projects, but he took all the credit. So everybody remembers him. They don't remember many of the inventors who actually invented the things that his name was stuck on it. Edison, 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 Edison. So it was the opposite of what you were talking about, the humility and the humanity. And my friend, Professor Roger Steer, I give him the credit for this. He talks about the 3 hums: humanity, humility, and humor, and how important those are. Humanity, humility, and humor. So please use that with my blessing whenever you want to.
I will.
The three hums. Let's go on to purpose, PQ. When people are trying to find meaning and purpose, you've got a clear sense of meaning and purpose. When people are trying to find meaning and purpose, how do you help them find meaning and purpose?
I'm going to have to borrow this. I actually borrowed this concept from the virtual mentor, Marshall Goldsmith. I'm a Marshall coach. So his book, The Earned Life, which just come out, is also quite a decent read, because he kind of knocks you into thinking about where would you place yourself on a scale between regret and fulfillment. And what that simply means is, if you have lived your life up to now, and if you are somewhere slanting towards regret, then surely you might want to consider some work that you might do to actually get a little closer to fulfillment. And if that's the case, then I would say that there's purpose there. I mean, it's as simple as, my purpose is to do this in order to get there. But if you actually have, and you report yourself, look, I'm 90% on this line and I'm close to my fulfillment, then you could reflect back on what has been that driving force. And for most of us, that would probably be quite close to a kind of a buried purpose that we will kind of dig out and unveil. And so my purpose has been, so let me attempt that question for me. My purpose in life is to just help other people. At this stage of my life, it wasn't something that resonated or was conscious to me when I was 10, 15 years ago, but it's kind of very clear to me now. And how do I rationalize it? In the remaining time I have left, let me do my best to help as many people as I can.
Yeah, lovely. I love that, Marshall, because Marshall trained me up as well, and I'm one of his coaches. And this idea of the spectrum between regret and fulfillment is a lovely way of doing it. I do like that one, and helping others. I share that one. Lovely. Next one, you've had a lifetime of training and keeping fit and that kind of stuff. And now, as you and I, me just over the border into the 60s, and you just approaching your 60th birthday, what's your top tip on keeping yourself, that might be useful for others, it works for you, keeping yourself physically fit, what you do, and what about looking after your mental fitness?
So I have problems in both areas, admittedly. The one is I have actually been habituated into staying fit, as we do. So that started in Dartmouth. It kept up with me through the fleet, and I've always enjoyed activities, sports, running, we canoe, we dragon boat, we do all those stuff, right? So it's cost me, because just around the pandemic, I actually exercised excessively, and there was not much else to do except that. And so a lot of days were spent doing that. And so, you come to 60 years old, and then your knees start to give you problems and all that. So I've kind of pulled back on that, Jonathan. And I'm trying to rediscipline myself to move away from the mental model that walks are not good and running is better. So I'm dealing with that right now. So truth be told, I'm actually, and I just said this yesterday to my wife, I actually can walk at the pace of a slow jog. That is like 7 kilometers an hour. I mean, it's like a fast, brisk walk. So people might find that strange in the morning when they see me. Then I deal with the regularity of it, because being a consultant, I need to make clear choices about my exercise schedule, put it simply.
Yeah, and staying with that one for a while, I'm fascinated about this whole area of health, wellness, and as a dyslexic, I listened to lots of books, probably about 285 books in the last
Wow.
2.5 years, and many on having lost my brother to cancer 2 years ago, many on sort of health, wellness, avoiding cancer, intermittent fasting, and lack of inflammation. Now, what is very interesting, we had General James Bashall on, and he is the commandant of the Physical Training Corps, was one of his roles. And his the top instructor at the Physical Training Corps said, so now you're coming into your 60s, stop the long distance running, you know, because he was a para. We did P-Camp together. We got our parachute wings and our maroon beret together. And he's remained very fit, but he was doing lots of running. And of course, like you and me, the knees were getting a bit of a hammering. So he said 5 kilometers maximum, probably once a week, going to HIIT, do cycling, other things. And I'm now about to cycle 500 kilometers in 5 days to raise money.
Wow.
For Help for Heroes, which is the British version of helping veterans who've lost limbs, blown up, whatever it is.
Wow.
And we're going through the battlefields of northern France. Now,
nice.
Getting fit again, first I had to get a good bike, which I've just got, and I'm getting out and extending the kilometers. And it's a really good way of doing it. And of course, the old knees don't get such a hammering as when I was doing the marathons and the mountain marathons. So I found that to be very helpful. So whatever you do, HIIT certainly is great. We've got to do the weight bearing exercises because that's a key aspect of it. But also the cardio can come through things like rowing. I've got a rowing machine indoors, and also from the bike. What about mental health? What do you do for mental health, Karuna?
I actually, so when I was running and now that I'm walking, I don't use earphones and I don't listen to music and I don't use any of that. I actually play my chronological lifeline in terms of that. I spread that out, my earliest memories, perhaps when I was 4.5 years old or 5 years old. And then I look at the highs and lows and process all that. And I'm painting a visual picture and I'm actually smiling to myself, or I'm just saying that to myself. And that allows me to actually kind of play the timeline on the brain and keeping myself a little free from distraction and just contemplating. Now that's one. The second thing that
stay with that.
Okay.
Really interests me because I'm someone who's nearly always got, when I'm on my bike or training or whatever, even on a walk with the dogs, I've got earphones in and I'm listening to something which is improving my mind, or maybe it's motivational if I'm trying to do 80 bodyweight squats and 80 press-ups a day. And I'm listening to something which is really motivational. But actually, I think having too much information coming in isn't so good for you. And so sitting in the hot tub before I get into the cold plunge, sometimes quite good just to sit there and be with yourself.
Yeah.
Sounds like you've really got this one worked out with this idea of, let me play it back to you. You're listening, you're thinking about, no earphones, you're thinking about your lifeline from birth to today with some of the highs and lows and what you learned from them. And I'm painting a visual picture of those journeys, those crevasses, those peaks. Is that right?
Yeah. And the only thing you need to watch out for is when you do this, if you're going on a slow jog or a fast walk, is to make sure that you don't have to do it on the roads, because you can actually get drift out and you might actually put yourself at risk. So in Singapore, we have these lovely things called park connectors, where the government has actually built up all these connectors where you can go by the canals and the rivers and all that. So you don't have cars, and you might get into a bicycle, you might have a bicycle charging at you, but you can, if you stay well enough to the left or right, you'll be okay. So I draw a lot of joy from that. That's one. So I actually look forward to the 75 to 90-minute workout. Like I'm doing, I'll probably do one tomorrow, tomorrow morning actually. And before it gets too hot in the day, you actually spend some time with yourself and stay safe while you're doing it. And you come back really, really refreshed. Plus you have the benefits of exercise and the endorphins and all that anyways. That's one. The other thing that I do, and I'll share this up front, is over the years, I'm not good at it, but I enjoy my downtime from work through golf. So basically I do golf quite a bit. I should do more, but I'm not retired yet. So basically I get away for like every 2 or 3 months, Jonathan. I go away for 3 days or 2 or 3 days. And here's what I golf alone. So I just golf in the morning and I shut myself into a hotel room with the air conditioner at full blast and just sitting down in kind of a dim setting for hours and just to generally calm down from everything. free of distraction. And that, I mean, it's like a silent retreat in its own, except you just get to enjoy the golf in the morning, right? And you don't have anyone distracting you with anything. You just golf it out and you spend the day and make sure. And I have a set format to actually live in the same. We go with Batam in Indonesia, and I do that. And there's a food court right below. I might even pack the food up and come up, and I'll just stay completely in the room. It's so refreshing to do that.
Wow. No, that's very impressive. I love that one. The other thing that I'm going to go into around the Inspiring Leadership Compass, the next element is EQ, an area much championed by coaches like yourself and myself. I was lucky enough to work with Dr. Reuven Bar-On, who designed this idea of EQI. He helped us design the Inspiring Leadership Compass. He gave us some ideas for that, which Lee and I were very grateful to him. And he's now in his just about to approach 80, he said the other day. And fought in 4 Arab Israeli wars, so quite a character. What is a tip you'd give people about developing their EQ? You meet some super bright people, high IQ, low EQ. What do you do to help them develop their EQ?
So this goes, I mean, okay, so EQ typically has components like, I mean, the well-known self-awareness at the root of it all, self-management, and then you have relationship management and social awareness. So those are 4 very compelling areas, but taken together, I would go back to, I'm a follower of Tasha Eurich's work. And basically, I would actually say, stop asking why and start asking what. So what it simply boils down to is stop kind of percolating to the reasons as to why you're not good enough and get into the what's. Stop paying too much attention to the rear view mirror and start looking forward, because we're obviously going to have to think about the impact we have on people and start dealing with whether or not that was intentional. So actually the whole purpose here, and this is a working requirement these days, because we're going to have leaders at every level in the organization rather than just position. And so position is fast giving way to influence. And the only chance we're going to have with influence is to be relational, for people to say that we are relational, and for us to grow our relatability, and that EQ piece is so fundamental to this, Jonathan.
That's really good. A fresh for me one. So I'm spelling Tasha Eurich, T-A-S-H-A?
And Eurich, E-U-R-I-C-H. You can get her on YouTube. She did phenomenal studies on self-awareness, and her TED Talks are actually quite interesting to watch.
Great. No, I will. Thank you. That's new material that no one else has shared with us before now. Next one, lovely. Next one is CQ, collaborative, cognitive, and cultural intelligence, bringing IQ, but with the team and everything else, and an inclusion of other people and diversity and equality. What would be a tip for you helping people to be more culturally aware of others, and linking on, it's a sort of development of EQ, really, your impact on other people who are different from you, who you often will judge, and people might be discriminatory against others, or critical or judgmental of them. How do you help people to be much more understanding and accepting of difference?
The balance or the relationship between one's style in terms of the flex available versus or in relation to how one chooses to read the situation. So in the academic world, this is probably called sense making to some extent. So the more complexity we face and the more uncertainty and the difficulties we face, we need to start sense making. And that includes, Jonathan, cultural intelligence, appreciating that people do not come from the same backgrounds, or they have different sets of skills. They might be privy to different data sets. They might actually have or predisposed to, basically different information sources. They might actually have accumulated different knowledge bases in their lives. Just being curious about people. And a lot of that is also another part that's terribly understated in organizations is the extent of how wisdom actually slips past us. I mean, do we actually pay attention to people who have lived this out? we choose not to because it becomes a bit of a buggeration to actually go and ask them what really happened and what didn't happen well. But that's the real antidote to growing complexities and uncertainties is risk mitigation. So I would say that the whole thing around sense making is actually going to be quite important, but in relation to how one needs to potentially adapt oneself to be able to be more responsive and relational.
Very good. There's real richness in everything you're saying there. The wisdom of others that slips past us, this idea of risk mitigation, understanding the risks and taking mitigating action. You've got to live with them. Otherwise, if you're a captain and didn't like risk, you'd never leave port in your ship. That'd be great. You're low risk there, but not actually doing your job and adapting. And this idea of sense making and being curious. I think curiosity is really helpful. Everybody you meet has something to teach you, if only you would listen to them. And that was
absolutely
I was saying of my mother that she often replayed to me. Thank you for that. Lovely. Resilience, RQ, this ability to cope with adversity and setbacks. What's your top tip for people? It's one often people overplay and it affects their health because they're so resilient that they don't look after their sleep and their food and their family and relationships. So it's a fine line of getting this right, but to get it appropriate and the right level of resilience, what's your tip to people?
I tell myself, I shared at the start of this conversation that I had the privilege of being in exchange service with the Australian Navy in my early 30s, and I spent 2 years with the clearance diving mine warfare folks, and they had this working motto which still rings in me as a kind of a mantra in relation to resilience. It's simply the good old overcome, improvise, and adapt. Be always ready to overcome things because it's not going to change, to improvise because you can change some parts of it, and adapt when you cannot or will not, and you just get in there and I say wake yourself up. Only you and only we and only I can be responsible for how I take advantage of a situation so that I don't become for the worse off. And that's just a simple self-talk routine that I put myself through every so often to get to that inherent negativity we all tend to have.
Yeah, I love it. And in many ways, there's sort of Eastern wisdom and advice, whether it be Confucius and others that have gone before, but also the Stoics from 2,500 years ago, controlling the controllables. And what do I have control over in this situation, which is I'm in real adversity here? I can control my thoughts and I can control my actions. That's really all I can. I can influence others. And I do think it's a very good point you make, that we don't have so much control, yell and tell, as you said nicely with the command and control, as we did before. Now it's influence people through good relationships and through trust, and the fact that there is a give and get, and it's not all you take, that they trust you, so that not only do you win that battle, but you win the war because you've got a long-term relationship. Many people just think it's a short-term, what can I get? The typical sort of Goldman Sachs banker who's going to get their Ferrari, but they'll be selling you triple D rated stock and calling it AAA and pretending it's good for you, but it's a pile of horse manure. Okay, let's not go that one too deeply. I'm sure there's some really nice people at Goldman Sachs. It's just I've come across one or two who are very avaricious in that. Now, the next one is brand. What's your brand, and what have you learned from your own 360 feedback? Because you're always doing 360 with everybody else, getting feedback on them. But when you've worked with yourself and when you've seen the benefit of 360 with others, what's your sort of top tip of why people should do 360?
I think feedback is key to growth. I've not said that, so many people have said that. Why? Because it simply holds the mirror up to us. We're not going to want to look it out for ourselves. And we, after a while, generally, we have this inflated view of our worth, ourselves, our abilities, and a whole lot of stuff, right? And we need to work quite consciously in surrounding ourselves, like as you call them, Jonathan, virtual mentors. We need to get into the space where we are not afraid to seek feedback and give feedback. Now that actually would then boil down to the fact that it goes as simply as this in a technique that I use and I share with leaders I work with. What do you appreciate me for? And what do you wish I would do more or become better at? I mean, do more of or become better at. And the positive psychology part of it is, let's start with the bouquet. I appreciate you, Karuna, for what you do, and but I just wish you'd be less blunt.
Mm.
And then if you have two or more people telling you that, I mean, that's analytics. That is data for us,
Yeah, and I was doing an offsite in Portugal recently with a CEO and his top 12. And I just got them the usual exercise you've probably done, swivel chair in the middle. The CEO went first. The others all shared, continue doing this and stop or start doing this.
Nice.
And they only had 30 seconds to give it. So they had to be really succinct. And someone was writing it down. And then they gave it to the CEO when everybody had finished. And he shared how he felt and what he appreciated about it. Really powerful, really powerful. It's a great exercise. Legacy. You've left a huge legacy in your life already. What would you teach others to think about when they're thinking about the legacy they're leaving in their lifetime? What would be your tip here?
This is a question I kind of have difficulty with, simply because I think it's not easy to answer, and at the other hand, I'm also immensely grateful. So I'll just say it this way. Today, I'm just very grateful that I have my two children. My daughter's 30 and my son's 27, and they will still sit with us in a table and eat with us, and it means the world to my wife and I, because it then says that somehow some things have become a little right, and it's well worth that investment and all the sacrifice made. So that's I will just say that it's about how you define pretty much who you actually make choices with and how you behave and how you impact them. And I have yet to meet a successful person who is not inherently successful, who's not happy at home in some form or the other. Home being a big concept. It could be your fishing buddies, it could be anything, right? But you do have a center. So legacy is pretty much the work of that centering we do, and we remember that. Yeah. So I'm happy that my kids, stay with me.
Yeah, it's a good one. And I think many people think they have to build bridges or monuments or something like that live long beyond them. But I think it's often the impact you make on your own family. And that's right. The 5 Regrets of the Dying, which is always one that people don't need to read the book, but it's let me see if I can just pull it up here. It was by Bonnie Ware. The book was okay, but her 5 things, which I thought were quite profound. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Secondly, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Then I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. Number 4, I wish I stayed in touch with my friends. And number 5, I wish I had let myself be happier. And I think those are really profound ones. And I keep just checking in with myself, particularly having had so many people in my life dying early or dying beyond what we were expecting that their lives would be like. I'm counting my blessing that I'm alive today. I woke up today. I'm feeling good. And then, everything else after this is a bonus. And at the end of my life, it's not that, the inbox is still full and the stuff will be piling in there, but it's what your family will say, what your friends will say. And do you feel that you've lived a life of meaning and purpose, living your life on purpose rather than off purpose? Okay.
Well done.
Last 2 or 3 questions. Executive teams. You're constantly working with top executive teams in Singapore and around the world. When you've had, even in the Navy, because you were always working on crews and teams, when you had a crew or now a team which has gone a bit toxic, maybe one of the individuals is toxic, what's your top tip to people when they find themselves in this situation? What should they do? If there's one thing that they can do, what would be your top tip?
Oh, wow. If this one is something I practice quite regularly. If you need to get work done, seek alignment, which is vertical, which means get it done. You understand where the limits are and basically just complete the task. So it's more, it's like a command and control thing within process, and in organizations that kind of works well because just get it done, right? But if you need to change anything and you have people on your team who don't agree with you, then the harder work on building a collective around mutual respect and understanding and opening up conversation and creating that psychological safety and kind of behaving with humility, exercising or practicing empathy, and just being one who is respectful becomes all the more important. So there's work to be done with teams like that, Jonathan, when an organization needs to or deliberately goes through change. But otherwise, the structures in organizations allow for that alignment. It's like in the military, you'd call it mission analysis or mission control, and just get that going. So people who don't agree with each other need not actually become happier and work with each other simply for that reason, but depending on the task at hand. I would say BAU, work or business as usual, you can go alignment, vertical, or you need to think about going horizontal to build that collaboration that you need to kind of have in the team. I hope that was useful.
It was. And if one of the team that you've got is what I'd call a white collar psychopath, that they're playing up to you and sucking up to you as the team leader, but really they're playing all the others off and looking about their own team, not the first team that they're part of, your team, but they're looking after number one themselves and their team, who love them, but they might be toxic in the team and undermining things. What do you do about that person?
Remove.
Yeah.
The leadership act would be to remove this person, no matter how valuable he or she might appear to be, because the collective always reigns better or becomes better payout than any individual. So this is the thing about influence, right? If we grow influence between people, the resultant is more than, and the research backs this up, that collective is a lot more powerful than one individual who's simply brilliant. In my life, I've had to deal with that a few times, and I've had bosses whom I've actually seen doing that, where they made the hard choice between letting the star go and you don't want a striker all the time. You need a team. It's as simple as that.
That is so true. And time and again, I'm finding I'm really challenging CEOs because they go, oh no, but this person, they make a lot of money, or they've turned their bit of the business around. I say, but they're poisoning the team. Yeah, but we'll adjust, we'll work around them. And the others don't mind too much. They've got used to him. No, get him out, because you'll be even more successful. And I've seen this again. Yes. They've got rid of them and they go, oh, it's amazing. The person who replaced them, that team seems to be liberated. Yeah, of course it is. And they're making more money than they were before. And it's not just about the money. It's about the trust and
totally.
The respect. Anyway,
so just allow me to add, I mean, McKinsey is not everyone's favorite, but I'll just cite a McKinsey study that took place about 5 years ago that said that if you take between a work group of individual functional responsibilities and you actually compare that to a high-performing team, the difference can be up to 420% in terms of the effectiveness. So I think a target. While our resources are scarce, we should actually think about building stronger collectives in the middle levels of the organization to get people building into a team of teams, as Stanley McChrystal pointed out in his book. I mean, I think that kind of thing is so powerful in terms of empowerment. And you can't have that striker who simply wants to score goals.
No, I so agree. After this, if you'd send me the McKinsey article, I need to send it on to a CEO of mine who he said, this is the first time on this offsite that I felt the sense of my first team. I've been used to being the spider at the center of the web, controlling a number of individuals in a group, and I didn't think they needed to be a team. Oh yeah, they do. Lovely. I love that one. Right. Favorite book on leadership, and why should people listen to it? You can hold it up for those who are viewing the YouTube, but for those listening, tell them what the book is.
I'm like sold on this piece of work. I mean, it's coming out of Harvard from Heifetz and Linsky. And why chapter 1 catches me. It's called Leadership on the Line. I think it's 2017 or 2018 book, if I recall. And it simply pins us into the predicament facing us with leaders and the predicament facing leaders in how they have to articulate and start that vision. And chapter 1 addresses that quite nicely by saying, wait a minute, is this the vision or is it your ambition? And a lot of the work that I do in organizations suggests to me that a leader comes in, a CEO comes in and suddenly has a 2.0 and everyone says, oh no, here we go again. And then it becomes quite difficult to deal with it. So a little bit of that work in chapter 1 took me. There's another chapter in there called Manage Your Hungers. And in this space, I often deal with leaders in positions who have higher than normal psychological needs. For example, control is a very evident one, and they really need to control everything, right? Because they got to where they were because they were very successful super managers. And then it says you need to manage this, because if you're not, you're going to have an unintended impact on people feeling smaller than they would like to be themselves and not feeling trusted at work. So I love the book. I mean, I actually give it as essential read to senior leaders.
I do love it. When I did the Harvard course, the leadership course,
Yeah.
It was essential reading for us there. Lovely. Well, we're now ready for the final 2-minute top tip, and then we'll finish recording and you and I'll have a chat. But would you just introduce yourself again and share your practical 2-minute top leadership tip?
My name is Karuna Ramanathan. I operate out of Singapore. I'm an independent leader. I'm a change consultant for the last 6 years as an independent. And along these 6 years have just taught me that we're going to boil it down to one top tip. It has to be respect. Think about respect. Most of us were brought up to respect others, and we need to recall that back, because it must be a fundamental part of our identity, because respect is the backbone to empathy, and empathy as a practice would allow us to demonstrate humility, Jonathan.
Fantastic. Well, look, it's been an absolute joy. It's been a whistle-stop tour. We've covered so much material, but also you've got such a wealth of experience to share with people, to help people, which is part of your calling. So thank you for being on the Inspiring Leadership podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. To everyone out there, I wish you the best to be the better versions of ourselves. We all can do it.
Thank you.